Hello, everybody, and welcome into a brand new episode of the Sports Hub Patriots podcast. I'm Alex Barth from 98.5 The Sports Hub, 98.5thesportshub.com. Getting ready to take a look ahead at the Patriots Week 7 matchup in London against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Joining us for this one from CLNS Media, Taylor Kyles. Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Let's talk some Pats football. It's exciting now. We got Drake Maye, London, storylines. Let's get after it.
And I'm excited to have you on because for people who have watched, followed the show this year, usually I have somebody on, like a writer on who covers the other team before, for the preview show. But I wanted to have you on. I want to have a Patriots writer on because to me, and I'll start here, this is kind of how I look at this game big picture. This game isn't so much about the Jaguars for the Patriots. And what I mean by that, it's two things. One, I think when it comes to Drake Maye, in some ways, the second start for a quarterback can be more telling than the first, because the first start, you're just kind of going out there and slinging it, right? Nobody has any tape on you. You're kind of running on that adrenaline. Now it's like we get to see, all right, like what's sustainable? What did they fix? What did they add? And the other part of it is the Jaguars just aren't very good. And for a Patriots team that's trying to turn a corner, self-reflective weeks can be very helpful. And that doesn't mean the Patriots can or should totally ignore the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, you game plan for your opponent. But I feel like this is a get-right game for the Patriots in that in getting ready for the Jaguars, there's an opportunity for them to focus on a lot of what has ailed them, what they need to fix. Drake Maye mentioned penalties this week, potential changes to the lineup, things like that. And in a game where you're not so overmatched, right, this would be different against like the Niners or even the Jets this week or next week. I feel like this was a good game for the Patriots to, look a little bit internally at what they're doing wrong and what they want to fix. So I'm curious if you feel the same way, but I do feel like this is a very look within game for the Patriots.
100%. I think that, like, even with Jacksonville's run game, I think that's probably the strength of really either side of the ball for them. Tank Bigsby, that's tough, has been killing it. But even that scheme kind of plays into what the Patriots do well, where they've struggled against these Shanahanian schemes where it's a ton of outside zone and toss plays and things like that. Jacksonville's more downhill, a lot of duo, a lot of inside zone. The Patriots have been solid there. And if they do make the adjustments, I think maybe we'll see a difference at linebacker, more of Tavai at that middle linebacker spot with like Christian Ellis and Sione Takitaki mixing in beside him. But I think they'll be pretty solid. And we know the coverage really has been fine as long as you're not getting attacked on play action. And offensively, run game struggles last week, but this week, Layden Robinson looks like he's going to be starting at right guard, Mike Nwenu back at right tackle. You can rely on those guys to get some movement. Ben Brown obviously looks like he might be a diamond in the rough after he joined midway through last week. So you get the run game back on track. Kayshon Boutte mentioned after last week's game, he thought that they didn't throw downfield enough, which, now he's getting in front of the mic and he's definitely entertaining to listen to. But this is the kind of defense where they're one of the worst defenses in the league in terms of defending the pass. This is the week where you air it out. And it's like Drake Maye, Alex Van Pelt told us, his strength is his arm and throwing downfield with accuracy. This is the week where you unleash him. Just give Demontre Jacobs some chip help, and let's get after it. I think we may see a 300-yard game from the rookie. I'm just putting that out there.
Well, all right. So let's talk about Drake Maye. And I wrote my preview. It's up now on 98.5thesportshub.com. 5 things. And with Drake Maye, there's 3 areas I'm looking for improvement or change. 2 of them are totally within his control. One of them is kind of an external thing. Number 1, turnovers. You can't turn the ball over 3 times every game. Like, I get he's never going to be towards the bottom of the league in turnovers. It's just kind of quarterback he is, but too much last week. Kind of hand in hand with that, accuracy. Again, he's never going to be a guy that completes 75, 80% of his passes week in and week out, but the misses have to be, like, some of the misses were not competitive, right? We call them sprays, where he's just putting the ball completely away from the receiver. And then the third for me, and this isn't necessarily up to him, but you mentioned the struggles in the run game. Drake Maye said Ramondre Stevenson will be a game-time decision. I'm guessing even if he plays, it's not a lot. And the run game obviously struggled without him. Can they get Drake involved on some more designed runs or read options or things like that? Was their leading rusher last week. That all came on scrambles. I get maybe wanting to ease him in, but this would be a good week as any to maybe work some of those design quarterback runs in. So that's what I'm looking for from Drake Maye in his second start. That's the growth I'm looking to see. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the turnovers, I think he's a pretty risk-averse quarterback in terms of throwing into bad windows. Like, we saw that there were a few plays where they were running. We talked about it at practice. They're running those outs
Right.
or sticks. And then there's a cornerback who's waiting for Drake Maye to throw it. He identifies that, makes plays with his legs a couple of times. So you got that, but you do want to see like the spray misses over the middle. That's what you can't have. And he acknowledged it after the game that in the NFL, it's one thing in college, but in the NFL, windows are so small. These guys can close so fast that if you do miss high, you're probably going to end up throwing it to a safety or a cornerback. So got to be better there for sure. But I think another thing that I want to see, maybe not so much the design runs, but if he's going to scramble, make sure that you're doing it in the right situations. Like there were a couple of times where I think he acknowledged maybe he pulled it down too quickly. For the most part, I think his decision-making was pretty good on that end, but also not taking sacks. That's been the big thing that he's actually emphasized this week. I think the strip sack was him maybe going through his progression a little fast. Looked like he had Kendrick Bourne getting open, didn't go to him, went to the other side of the field. And when you're an empty, you really can't get to your third progression. That's not really how it works. There was another sack I thought he took where he probably could have checked it down. So avoiding those negative plays, I know that's probably in the front of his brain this week. That may be the biggest area where I want to see him improve just in terms of that sack avoidance.
What do you want to see them do, Alex Van Pelt do schematically to help him?
Like I said, I want them to go downfield. I think Demario Douglas in those man-on-man situations, like you can't guard him in the phone booth. Drake Maye said it. So I want to see more involvement from Pop because I feel like it's crazy that the guy hasn't had a 100-yard game yet, I don't think, in his career. If you look at his tape going back to last season, there's just so much meat left on the bone, and that goes hand in hand with Drake Maye's accuracy. So want to see him definitely get more involved in the game plan. Also, maybe a little bit more of Kayshon Boutte at X and Jalen Polk at Z. Now, I understand that Alex Van Pelt mentioned that Jalen Polk's been playing X because they think he can win those one-on-one matchups. Whether Polk is in his head or not is kind of irrelevant, but Kayshon Boutte has been that guy who's winning the one-on-one matchups, even though I also think he's probably better as a Z. Those guys have been rotating along with Kendrick Bourne as well, all getting kind of time there. But I'd like to see Kayshon Boutte more of those one-on-one matchups and maybe some better opportunities for Jalen Polk. Like get him inside the numbers so he has a two-way release. Like just give him more flexibility so he's not pinned to the sideline because he doesn't have the size or speed to be that true X where he, DK Metcalf, he can run a go, a hitch, and a slant and live on those. He's fine because he's physically dominant. That's not really the kind of guy Polk is. So I'd like to see the scheme elevate him a little bit.
I would say, too, when it comes to Pop Douglas, as we look at this game specifically, the Jaguars have opposing quarterbacks targeting slot receivers have a higher passer rating against the Jaguars than any team in the league. Like, they cannot cover in the slot. I think Pop Douglas is the third highest slot usage rate in terms of percentage of snaps in the slot in the NFL. I know it was third before Monday Night Football, so there's been 2 games since maybe that changed it. But, like this, you mentioned Pop Douglas has never had a 100-yard game. This kind of feels like the perfect storm for that to happen. I'm not saying it will, but like if it's going to happen, this game is kind of set up perfectly for it, no?
No, absolutely. I mean, again, the Jags are pretty bad, honestly, in terms of their coverage. They're pretty bad everywhere. You can really just pick your poison. It's just going to be up to Drake Maye to put it on him because we know that Pop's going to be open.
What about the run game? So they struggled to run last week. I think some of that was from Andre Stevenson, but the line just, wasn't holding up either. We'll see. Again, I think even if Stevenson plays this week, he's limited just because he only practiced on Friday, and we'll see how involved he is today when the injury report comes out. We're recording this at 11 o'clock local time, so we don't have the injury report quite yet. People might be listening to this later, but yeah, I do feel like they need to get that going, whether it's with Drake on design runs or something else. Like, you can't. We talked about the team being one-dimensional for 6 weeks. They make the quarterback change. They're still one-dimensional. It's just the other dimension. Like, you still got to put the whole thing together.
Yeah, and you mentioned the design runs. I would like to see a couple carries just because on some of those like inside zone plays where I don't think he's actually supposed to really be reading. I think it's just fake and you hold the unblocked defender on the backside, but they weren't really respecting those. So I'd like to actually see him mixed in so that you at least have to acknowledge that there is some chance that Drake Maye is going to carry it. Maybe throwing more on RPOs as well, give them something to respect backside, open up some cutback lanes there. I think there was one play where they like faked, it was a couple weeks ago where they faked like they were going to do an RPO and it helped open up a huge gap in the run game. So I'd like to see more of that. But really getting off their double teams and getting to the second level. Like that was where they really struggled last week. Mike and Winnie mentioned that the Texans were blitzing a lot, and because their linebackers are very aggressive and they can shoot those gaps, it made it hard for him to get off those. Now, Leighton Robinson helps you there. He's a little more athletic. He's got a little bit more range, so maybe that'll help with that problem a little bit. But execution needs to be better, but also I think giving Drake Maye some opportunities in short yardage in the red zone could definitely help, add another dimension to confuse the Jaguars potentially.
For people who missed it, Vidarian Lowe ruled out on Thursday with an ankle injury. So it looks like the group we're going to see, at least to start, will be Demontre Jacobs. And I correct me if I'm wrong, because having to learn a new one of these every week is getting a little confusing and becoming a little bit of a headache. It's going to be a 7 different offensive line for the Patriots in 7 weeks. Left to right, Demontre Jacobs, Michael Jordan, Ben Brown, Leighton Robinson, Mike Onwenu. How do you feel about that group? Where's the strong point? Where's the weak point?
Yeah, the crazy thing is it's 7 starting combinations. That's not even how many they've had like in games, because we'll see 2 or 3 lineups during the actual game due to injuries. But the left side is where I think the biggest question marks are. Obviously, Demontre Jacobs going up against a really good player in Josh Hines-Allen. One thing I will say, though, I've been actually, before the show, I was going through it on the tape. In third downs, in some obvious passing situations, end of the half, the Patriots did give Zach Thomas a lot of help. Now, it was tough because when you had Thomas and Jacobs in the game, it's like, well, it's really hard to chip both edges because you only have 3 guys in the route. If the other team isn't blitzing, they have 8 guys in coverage. You're really putting yourself at kind of a disadvantage. But I think they will give him enough help in those obvious passing situations, so it won't be quite as much of a challenge. Mike Onwenu, yes, he's allowed pressure at a pretty high rate at offensive tackle, but he's only allowed 1 hit and 0 sacks. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. Like, if you got to run out to the edge to get a guy to go around and Trayvon Walker, it is what it is, but I don't really care. Just make sure that quarterback isn't going down. So I think that's going to be big on that right side. Gerard Mayo, when he talked about Leighton Robinson, he did acknowledge that, he kind of hit a wall, but that he pushed through it, was praising the rookie for his practice habits. I talked to him in the locker room, and I was like, "Oh, you excited talking about London?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm fired up to play." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And, the energy that he had, it feels like he really has been putting in the work and maybe has taken a step. And Ben Brown looked like a real bright spot last week, allowed 0 pressures after being signed in the middle of the week. Now, he's not the fleetest of foot, right? He's not a great athlete. He's kind of the opposite of Cole Strange, where Strange is smaller, but he's crazy athletic and he moves really well. Ben Brown is more of a big, sturdy guy, but you're not going to move him. And he did a great job, I thought, last week, picking up line games and identifying those, which we know was a struggle for Leverett when they were in San Francisco. And Michael Jordan, obviously more of a spot starter than a quality starter for you, but still a guy who's put some quality things on tape as someone you barely expected to even make the roster until, the injury situation popped up. So strength, I think, is going to be that right side, especially when they're running the ball. We'll see if Leighton can be better one-on-one in pass protection and picking up stunts and things like that. But the rest of the line, I'm encouraged, but, you also have to acknowledge Ben Brown and Demontre Jacobs are those kind of, if the defense is going to attack anybody, it's probably going to be them.
So I guess Ben Brown's fascinating to me that, showed up on 2 days notice, center in a very center reliant offense pre-snap and had the game he had. So you feel, just looking at the tape, like, not that he's going to necessarily put out another clean sheet, but that kind of play is more or less sustainable for him. Like, you think he can give you more or less that performance again?
I do. Really, my biggest, and also Mike Onwenu mentioned that he and Michael Jordan were helping a little bit with Ben Brown because, again, it was such a short time frame, but did acknowledge, still, he knew what he was doing and he picked it up really quickly, which is awesome. And again, in terms of ID and the stunts and things, usually that's something that carries over because sometimes, especially centers, that it's coming. So if you have some idea like this look means this, that can help. And it looks like he did a pretty good job in that vein. What I'm more concerned about is if the Jaguars, and I don't really think they do this, but some defenses will put their best pass rusher on the center because usually the center is your weak link. We saw some teams do that with David Andrews. I don't really think the Jaguars have the scheme or the talent really to pull that off, but that'll be the one thing I watch for Ben Brown is, okay, are teams trying to specifically exploit him? But otherwise, especially against teams like the Jags, where they don't really blitz a ton, I feel like he'll be fine because there's not going to be a lot of one-on-one matchups.
Why do you think Leighton Robinson's getting the nod over City So?
Dude, we talked about it. It's a weird situation. So my guess here because when there was an injury at left guard, City went in last week. And then we know that Leighton's really been at right guard. I'm thinking maybe just to kind of simplify, because you have so many guards, they've said City is our left guard, Leighton is our right guard. Also, maybe just I think Layden has shown you a higher ceiling as well. Like I like City a lot, but he's been inconsistent when he's been out there. You see the promise, but he is a bit shaky. And Michael Jordan has just been more consistent. So I think that, and we've heard the coaches praise Layden for how much he showed in the summer, and they think he could be a special player. Mayo has said it multiple times. I think that's really what it is more than anything else. Just they think he has a higher ceiling and they want to get him reps, but they also don't want to put him out there in situations like against San Francisco where, he's kind of getting his lunch handed to him against a really good interior defensive lineman.
All right, as we transition here from the offense to the defense, Gerard Mayo laid out some focal points for the Patriots this week. And one of them, he talked about starting fast. He talked about the intensity level, which to me, basically you combine those two, right? Setting the tone. You want to set the tone early. This is a Jaguars team that's been in London for 2 weeks. They suffered a bad loss. How much are they caring about their coach at this point? Like if you get up on him early, they might tap out. This is a team in position to tap out. With the emphasis on starting fast and setting the tone, do you think there's a chance if the Patriots win the coin toss this week, they take the ball? Because I'm kind of like sitting now. We'll do. What's up? What
did you see that stand up that Mike and I did? I literally were.
I didn't. I honestly didn't. But like I'm thinking about it last night. And look, we'll spend like 3 minutes on this right now, and then they'll lose the toss, and it won't matter because maybe this is nitpicking. I think there's a difference between taking the ball and losing the toss and having the other team defer, like in terms of the message it sends to the team. But it doesn't it kind of feel like maybe take the ball this game? Like what do you have to lose, right?
100%. Now, usually because they are a defensive-led team, I think one, like the double dip, obviously, I think that's always why you do it. But when you have a stout defense, it can give the offense energy if you get a 3 and out, because then you get the hooting and hollering and you're getting to the sideline and the offense is like, awesome, we're going to get good field position. Let's do this. But this week, like Drake Maye, obviously slow start last week because he was kind of jittery, but now second start, maybe he's calmed down a little bit. I've been saying the same thing. If you do win the coin toss, you take the ball and you need to go down and score because like you mentioned, one, I think they can run it up against this Jaguars team pretty quickly. Obviously makes it easier on the defense, but because it feels like this is a team that's starting to kind of fall apart from within, do they have the mental dexterity to really stay in it if you kind of put the beat down on them pretty early? Yeah, the double score is great, but it's also better if you get that fast start, seize momentum, and you go into halftime up multiple scores.
Another thing Gerard Mayo talked about was there's going to be changes in the lineup. And we already kind of discussed offensively. And he said that specifically when asked about penalties. What can you do to get it right? And he mentioned having the reliable players on the field. I don't know how much that applies offensively just because they kind of only have enough bodies to throw out there. Like they don't really have their pick, and the guys that are committing penalties have to play because they don't really have backups. Defensively is another story. They have a little more depth. Christian Ellis is one guy the coaching staff has been really high on. Just so happens he plays a similar position to Joshua Uche and Keon White, who are two of the more penalized players on the defensive side of the ball for the Patriots. I guess we'll start there. Before we get to other changes, this is the one we kind of know to expect. Are they going to play Christian Ellis off the ball? Are they going to play him off the edge? Situationally, what are you expecting to see from him?
Yeah, so Ellis is someone who kind of caught my eye in the preseason because they were using him a lot as a blitzer, trying to get him one-on-one against running backs, kind of similar to what they used to do with like Jamie Collins. And it's similar to Mack Wilson kind of in the fact that, Mack Wilson in his first season, they didn't really have a great role for him. Second year, he also bulked up, which helped. Then he had a bigger role in the defense. Midway through the season, they need pass rush help. They realized, this guy can actually rush off the edge. Ellis isn't really an edge rusher, but he has shown promise and competitiveness as a blitzer. We saw last week he was in the area on that like 3-way sack between it was like him, Keon White, and Marte Mapu. I know 2 of them got credit for a half sack, but really they all should have got thirds of sacks. But really he's been more that third down blitzer, really took over the dime linebacker role a few weeks ago after Juwan Bentley got hurt. But really, we're starting to see him on early downs also insert into the lineup because, like I mentioned earlier, Tavai, they're trying to, I think, get him at the middle linebacker spot because he is really the most physical guy they have in that room to take on blockers and shed and do all that stuff. So I think they are going to have Christian Ellis more of an early down role. He's competitive, but also he's not ideal taking on blocks. So I also think Sione Takitaki definitely going to be in that mix as well, especially because he's more that guy who can play on the line of scrimmage like Tavai. I don't really think Ellis is that kind of dude.
What other changes are you looking for? May I said changes. So if Ellis is one, who else do you think maybe gets an opportunity?
Yeah, I kind of just want to see less of Keon White against the run, and it's tough because he's hot and cold. Like, he's made tons of plays, but there's also times where I see him get blown out of his gap. And on most of the explosive runs they've allowed, it's Raekwon McMillan's almost always there. And then it's usually Keion White, who's also at the point of attack, often when he's in that interior position where, they have the 5-man fronts and you have your big bodies in Godshaw, Equale Farms, Jaquelin Roy, whomever. And then the other guys, usually Keion White or Deech, tries to give you some juice. Now, Wise is a bit more sturdy against the run, but if you double either one of those guys, you're going to get movement. They're just not built to take on those kinds of blocks. But Keion, we know that he's kind of like a raging bull, like he's explosive and he likes to really get after it and he's aggressive, but sometimes that backfires and then he ends up getting blown out of his gap or he's not even competitive. So I think maybe we see a different role for him. I think he's still going to play plenty. Like, he's been a great interior rusher. Like I said, he has made plays, especially as a stand-up linebacker on the edge, but I do think you need to kind of reduce his role. I'd also like to see less of Marte Mapu in the box. He's been fantastic on the back end. He's more competitive against the run than he used to be, but at the same time, I just don't think he's built to be taken on offensive linemen. Like, he can get under block sometimes, but if they get their hands on him, he's going into the dirt. So more of Marte Mapu deep, maybe a different role for Keion White, and then I think Raekwon McMillan, a much smaller role for him on early downs.
You didn't mention too much in the secondary there, which I honestly agree with you. Like, I think the secondary's been pretty good, except they've had this problem against teams with bigger receivers. And here we go with Jacksonville, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram. I know is a tight end, but plays like a big receiver, right? I would think you put Gonzalez on Thomas, on the rookie, Brian Thomas Jr. Out of LSU, because he's been their best receiver. And it's kind of funny. I think we were talking about this in the locker room the other day. This is the first time in Gonzalez's career we're not talking about him facing like a top 10 receiver in the league. And instead, all right, no, you don't have a top 10 receiver. You do have a potential breakout star rookie, though. So, that's the matchup. But after that, again, you've got size with Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram, whom in the slot. I don't know.
He's not big, but, he's
Christian Kirk in the slot, right? Not big, but a good player. How do you go man-to-man? I know people have wanted the Patriots to play more man-to-man. I think you're in that group. Do you go man-to-man, or is this more of a zone game, and how do you match it up?
I think the Patriots always want to play man, and I think because they're playing more cover 2, there's a misconception that they aren't playing man coverage. Really, they play cover 2 as a complement to their man coverage. Like, a lot of the time, they're disguising it in a look that looks like it's either cover 1 or cover 0. So when they are in those obvious passing situations, most of the time they are going to play man because they know that's their strength. So that's another reason why I say if you run it up on them quickly, then the defense can get in that man coverage where they thrive. Like Gabe Davis, I think John Jones obviously gives up some size to him, but I think Jones is plenty competitive, and Gabe Davis, we know he has a drop problem. So if there's a guy on his hip and he has to make a catch, even if he has to climb the ladder, I'm willing to risk it. I'm really not that intimidated. I'm more scared of Alan Lazard than I am of Gabe Davis. Christian Kirk, I think, still a dynamic player in his own right, but I think that Marcus Jones and him, that's a good matchup. Like, Marcus Jones, super sticky, hard guy to uncover from, and he's competitive at the catch point. If you get him up against a guy who's his size, I think he can shut him down. And I don't want to say Brian Thomas is going to get shut down because he's a phenomenal player, and Trevor Lawrence can put the ball in some ridiculous windows. Like, every time I watch his tape, he makes a throw where I'm just like, I've never even seen anybody try to do that before, or at least very, very rarely. So, there's going to be some perfect passes. I'm sure Brian Thomas will make some big catches, but Gonzo is also a big dude. He can run. Like, I don't think he's going to be intimidated by Brian Thomas, who's also a freak athlete. And then when it comes to the safeties and man coverage, I think that whether it's Kyle Duggar, Marte Mapu, I think they'll be fine against Evan Ingram. Like, we talked about it. He had 2 big catches last week, but like, one was really well schemed, and the other one, I was like, all right, that's a good play, but man-to-man coverage, I don't really think he's that kind of cat. So I think they match up really well with Jacksonville, and it's another reason why I don't think the Jags are going to put up a ton of points.
So I wanted to ask you about Lawrence here as we kind of start to wrap this up. He's got taken a lot of heat, and look, understandable. You're starting quarterback of a 1-5 team. Like, that's going to come with pressure, certainly. But would they have 6 passes dropped in the end zone alone last week? Forget the rest of the field. Like, the line's not playing great right now. Where are you at as you study Trevor Lawrence this week? Like, obviously, he was tagged as that generational best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck, and he's going to have to play catch up if he's even going to get to that point right now. But there's some people saying, it was a mistake to give him the contract. They should have moved on. Where are you at with him right now, just as a player, as a quarterback in this league?
I don't want to pretend like I study Trevor Lawrence or anything, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here and be
Well,
disingenuous.
just from what you've seen getting ready for this week.
I mean, he is super talented. I understand why people thought he was a generational prospect. Like I said, he makes some throws, and that's where a lot of the drops happen. Like, if his receivers never dropped passes, he would have one of the most insane highlight reels we've ever seen. Like, that's just, and that's going back years. Every year, Jacksonville is near the top of the league. I just guess hands are not part of their scouting process when they look at wide receivers. They're like, hey, he's athletic, we'll teach him to catch. And like, clearly that's not true. Whatever, as that point aside, I think he has the talent, but he's also super inconsistent. And I think that a lot of the great quarterbacks you see, they have this like kind of maniacal thing about them where they are genuinely obsessed with football. And I think in the scouting process, he said football's not his whole life. And obviously, you know, that's a mentally healthy thing to say. Like, that's sounds like a really well-adjusted person, but at the end of the day, like, Drake Maye gets on the podium after the loss yesterday and talks about how his family is going to probably talk more about the fact that he lost and how well he played. Like, you come from these competitive families and like these people, the best guys usually have a screw loose. I just have never really seen that in Trevor Lawrence. I think he's probably a good leader. I'm sure he's a great person and he's a great athlete, but the lack of consistency is part of the reason why I'm just not sold on him yet. I think also the situation he's been around his entire career has clearly been pretty dysfunctional because it feels like every week Jacksonville is committing some like penalties or some weird decision, or they're just getting their doors blown off. And your quarterback is a big part of that, you know, like your quarterback has to be the guy that rises all ships at the end of the day, even though obviously he's not getting a ton of help. So I don't know, man. I think maybe better coaching staff, you know, that'll really whip this roster into shape, better talent around him that can actually catch the ball may help, you know, augment some of the things that he's not great at. But yeah, just weird situation in Jacksonville, you know, also per usual, you know, that's kind of been the story.
You mentioned that inconsistency. Like, so I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the breakdown. He hasn't been like substantially worse under pressure this year than he has with the clean pocket. All three of his interceptions, according to PFF, have come when kept clean. Like, he doesn't have a turnover this year when under pressure, at least not an interception. So do you see anything maybe that the Patriots can do to bring out that inconsistency in Trevor Lawrence?
That's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, pressure is pressure. Like, some guys are definitely going to rise above it, but you still want to have that because whether it means like he has to move, maybe it affects his footwork, his arm angle, what have you. Like, at the end of the day, that really is kind of what you want to show. I guess maybe disguises could really work. You know, I know Patriots fans are kind of upset because earlier in the season, the disguises led to busted coverages and things like that. But against these smart quarterbacks, like I think Trevor Lawrence is smart, but I don't think he's on the level of like these really like Geno Smith, where they've seen everything and really at the end of the day, or like Patrick Mahomes, or at the end of the day, like you're better off just playing straight up man. Because if you try to disguise and you don't have good leverage or a guy slow to get to his spot, they're going to take advantage because they know where those weak points are. I don't think Lawrence is quite in that category. So I think maybe changing the look on him pre-snap could potentially lead him to making some bad mistakes.
All right, as we wrap this up here, Taylor, finish the sentence. The Patriots will win this game because, or the biggest reason the Patriots will win this game is because
of Drake Maye. I think that he's going to really be unleashed downfield, and I think it's going to get the Patriots out to that lead that it's going to be tough for Jacksonville to come back from.
He is Taylor Kyles from CLNS Media. You can read his work at clnsmedia.com, on social at tkyles39. I learned this earlier this season. Why the 39, Taylor? I think some Patriots fans.
Danny Woodhead. That was my first favorite player when I became a Patriots fan.
You just made a lot of people feel old, but it's still an awesome reason. Kyles39, Danny Woodhead 39. Taylor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. Awesome.
We'll be back with a recap pod on Monday, myself and Matt Dolph. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the Sports Hub Patriots audio feed, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the Sports Hub YouTube channel. Until the next one, I'm Alex Barth. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you next time.